Okay, picture this. It's party season. There are massive feasts everywhere. Everyone's celebrating a bountiful harvest. Sounds pretty great, right? Well, in ancient Israel, these very festivals were the scene of a profound spiritual crime. So let's dive into this. So, what kind of crime could possibly be committed during a time of so much joy and abundance? Honestly, the answer is way more complex and, frankly, a lot more relevant to our lives today than you might think. To really get what's going on, we have to unpack the scene of the crime. And this whole story, it really revolves around two very specific locations: the places they harvested and these spots known as the high places. First up, you've got the threshing floor. Now, this was a totally practical spot, usually a flat, open area on top of a windy hill. Farmers would go up there and beat the harvested grain. Why the windy hilltop? Well, that was the whole point. The wind would blow away the light, useless husks, and the heavy, valuable kernels would fall right back to the ground. Pretty ingenious, really. And then you have the wine press. This was typically down in a valley. It was basically a big basin, often carved right out of the rock, where people would stomp on grapes to squeeze out all the juice for new wine. You can just imagine this being the center of the end of harvest party, right? A huge celebration. But here's the twist. These places weren't just for farming. The threshing floors, located on those high places, they doubled as religious centers for worshiping local gods. And the wine presses? Yeah, they became the hotspots for ritual fertility orgies. And this was all done in the name of making sure next year's harvest would be just as good. So right there, that's the central conflict. It's really a tale of two completely different ideas about God. See, the people of Israel they were trying to have it both ways. There's a word for this. It's called syncretism. And what's so important to understand here is that they weren't trying to abandon their God. No, not at all. They were trying to blend his worship with all the practices of the local fertility gods. They were trying to mix two belief systems that were just completely contradictory. And when I say contradictory, I mean it. The God of Israel was understood as the one and only God. Unique, transcendent, meaning he exists completely outside of nature, and he demanded absolute loyalty. The local fertility gods, on the other hand, there were tons of them. They were part of nature, and the belief was you could kind of manipulate them with the right rituals. You could worship a whole bunch of them at once, no big deal. You can almost hear them thinking, can't you? You really want us to put all our eggs in one god basket? I mean, look around. Their neighbors seem to be doing just fine by hedging their bets with lots of different gods. To them, relying on a single invisible god, it probably felt like a huge unnecessary risk. But this spiritual compromise, it was headed for disaster. The prophet Hosea came along and warned them that their attempts to secure their own future would actually lead to empty rituals and, ironically, emptier stomachs. And here is the great, tragic irony of the whole story. The very rituals they were doing to guarantee a good harvest were actually predicted to cause the exact opposite: barren land, spiritual starvation, and eventually being kicked out of their home altogether. Their spiritual insurance policy was actually a one-way ticket to losing everything. Which, brings up a really fascinating question. How could having full bellies, having a successful harvest, still leave a person feeling so spiritually hungry and empty inside? And the answer is maybe one of the most famous lines ever: "Man shall not live by bread alone." The whole point is that physical abundance, having all the stuff you want, when it's disconnected from its true divine source, it just can't feed the human soul. It leaves you starving for something more, for what truly matters. This kind of thinking leads us right into the logic of idolatry itself. And the prophets, they weren't just mad about this. They saw the whole practice as fundamentally absurd, just totally illogical. The prophet Isaiah paints this unbelievable picture to make his point. He says, okay, imagine a guy. He plants a tree, he waters it, he takes care of it, then he cuts it down. He uses half of the wood to make a fire so he can cook his dinner and stay warm. And then he takes the other half of that exact same log, carves it into an idol, and then bows down to it and says, "Save me." Isaiah just can't get over how ridiculous this is. He's like, should I really bow down to a block of wood? He says that the person who does this poor, deluded fool, is basically feeding on ashes. You're trying to get nourishment from something that has absolutely nothing to give. You're trusting in a complete deception. And this all builds to the ultimate takeaway from this ancient warning, a principle that is absolutely timeless, and it's this: you become what you worship. See, the final powerful warning from these prophets isn't just about the things you do, the rituals you perform, the rules you break. It goes so much deeper than that. It's about who you become. As the prophet Hosea puts it, they became as vile as the thing they loved. Just let that sink in for a second. When you dedicate yourself, your life, your love to something that is shameful or degrading, you start to take on its character. You start to look like it. So it all boils down to this fundamental choice. If you worship what leads to life, if you aim for things like joy and purity and fullness, you start to become those things. But if you worship a deception, something empty, something that degrades you, well, you become empty and degraded yourself. We are literally shaped by whatever we give our devotion to. And that brings this ancient warning crashing right into our world today. It leaves us with a question that echoes down through all these centuries, a question for every single one of us. What are we, day by day, choosing to become?